And we're live now with Jerome from Uno platform. So you might have caught a little bit of Uno earlier during Matthias's presentation. He was showing an Uno app running with his virtual GPIO drivers, and you might have caught a little bit of Ubuntu at UnoConf.
Yes.
But we're glad to have you here now to tell us how WSL plays a role in Uno platform for you and your team. So with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Exactly. And that's nice to see other people in this conference just taking a look at Uno, and especially with hardware stuff that they do like to work on. GPIO is always nice to deal with. Hello, everyone. My name is Jérôme Laban. I'm the CTO of the Uno platform project. So it's an open source project. I've been working on it for quite a while, and I'll be talking to you about all that we are doing with the Uno platform, and specifically all the recent updates that we've made to include that with the support for Linux and how it integrates with WSL with WebAssembly. So that's the kind of things we've been doing lately. So what is the Uno platform? So the Uno platform is about building XAML and C# applications on lots of platforms. So we're talking iOS, macOS, Android, WebAssembly, Linux, and Windows 7. So Windows 7 is a rough one, but the idea is that a lot of people have been asking for being able to develop applications still on Windows 7, especially if there are enterprise customers with long-term support agreements, or things that they cannot reprovision easily. So that's the kind of thing that we target. We open sourced at the Build conference in May 2018, and it's free to use. So it's something that you can take and just go for a spin, and it works quite well on all those platforms. So Linux and Windows 7 are still in preview in the preview channel for us. And you can go take a look at those if you want to. So you get a small demo from Mateos a while back. So nice to see all this. So how does it work? Basically, we're about making an application running on Windows and then port it over to the other platform. So that's our main scenario. And the reason for this is that a very long time ago, Microsoft told us, well, let's do applications for Windows Phone and for Windows 10 or Windows 8 at the time. And we were WPF and Silverlight developers at that time. And we started developing lots of things and got some quite a bit of experience developing for Windows and XAML and C#. And then clients started asking for us for many other features, and then said, well, can you do things over to iOS and Android? And then we started over poking around what we could do with the Xamarin and iOS Android at the time. And then that's when we started adding support for that at the time. So that's the two columns for that you can see here for Mac OS, so iOS and Android. And then over time, we started adding other platforms like WebAssembly that was added to the .NET support. So in Mono, worked by the team from Miguel de Casa. And then recently, we started adding Linux support for where it allows us to run on Raspberry Pi devices like the one that I have behind me, or on WSL using an X server that I will show you afterwards. The interesting part of all this is that the idea is that Uno is not present on Windows, though it uses all the tooling that Microsoft is providing for developing Windows application using WinUI, the new version of the XAML framework that is used by Windows. On the other platforms, when we're talking about WebAssembly, so WebAssembly is all about just running any kind of code, not just .NET, but any kind of other platforms. You're talking C, C++, Ruby, lots of Rust code that's been running on that platform. So that's kind of the amazing way of running non-JavaScript code in the browser, and .NET is not in rest there, so you can use that in that context. So we're using Mono to make that run. On macOS and iOS, we're using Xamarin, so the plain Xamarin bindings that allows to access all the features that are provided by the OS. On Android, we're using still Xamarin, so not Xamarin Forms in there. We're using Xamarin directly to be able to show that UI on on devices. And on Linux, we're using either .NET Core 3 or .NET 5 to run the content. And it's basically about just interacting with the system directly. So it's all about reusing all your skills that if you have been developing for Windows or using XAML in any form. It's all about reusing your skills to get to other platforms and not just stick to Windows. So how does it work? Well, we've basically been using a set of the Roslyn C# API to basically rebuild an empty set of all the APIs that are provided by the Windows API. So we're talking both the UI part and non-UI part. So that means that everything that's needed for building an application is API-wise available. Not everything's implemented, but we have the full API set that is available for developers to build on. And then if something's not working, then you can open an issue or implement it yourself if needed. And so that means that for the UI part, it's just about creating stack panel, grids, text blocks, pivots, bindings, and all of that that are provided by the Uno platform. But it's also about having non-UI parts of the UI available there, like file access, geolocation centers, file pickers, and all of that. So that's the kind of things that you don't want to have to relearn every time you switch platforms. So that means that when you want to access the file system, you can just use the WinRT APIs that are known on Windows, and then assume that those will work on the other platforms. So it may happen that some are not implemented, and that's something that the developer tooling will tell you about. But that's something that's interesting. So geolocation, or we even have a developer that's been hard at work and implemented the MIDI support. We got a demo for that at the UnoConf last month. So that's the kind of things that are very, very interesting to look at. The other part that's amazing about reusing existing libraries and about having the full set of APIs is that if there is a library that is already implemented that uses UWP as one of its vertical, that means that it can be recompiled on top of Uno without any changes, and that's amazing because it brings in all the knowledge, all the hard work that people have been doing to implement features on those libraries, and without changing anything, those just go and work on the other platforms and that are not on Windows. So one good example is in the Windows Community Toolkit. There's a library, there's a control that's called the data grid. It's a very complex control that was developed by people at Microsoft, and it was open source in the Windows Community Toolkit. And that control is very complex and worked on Silverlight, and it was ported over to WinUI. And then we could just take that control, compile it over to Uno, and then make it work on iOS, Android, the web, and now in recent running on Linux. So that's all about making sure that the code that already exists and that runs properly on Windows using C# and XAML, or just plain C#, just runs on the other platforms as well. And the ecosystem is growing. Prism, RX.net, Reactive UI. There's a conference next, I think it's during the month, for which there's support for in Uno. So you can reuse all your reactive skills that you may have running on different platforms. With regards to platform mappings, when we're saying something that is all about making a UI that looks the same and the behavior of platform APIs that look the same, when you develop your UI using XAML, when you're creating a text box that shows some text on the screen, you can just write that once on Windows or on other platform for that matter. You can develop on macOS as well. That works pretty well. And that text block is going to get translated to something that's relevant for the platform. So when we're saying when we're writing a text block on Windows, then it gets translated when running on an iOS device to a UI label, or a text view on Android, or an HTML paragraph on WebAssembly, and on Linux we're using Skia for rendering the UI, and that's so Skia and Skia Sharp, for which we do have official support that's in the official repo for Skia Sharp. So that's one of the good news for the support for Skia. And for the non-platform APIs, you just learn one API. So setting storage is all about storing, let's say, when you have an application, you have a user email that you need to store because when you relaunch the application, it needs to stay there. Then it's going to get mapped to the underlying APIs like NS user default, shared preferences, or IndexedDB when you're running on the browser. So that's the kind of things that we're looking at, and it's all about making sure that you reuse your skills. That's one of the big pillars of developing for the Uno platform. So it's all about making sure that we have an application running properly, and I'm going to be showing you just one specific demo that's pretty generic in terms of using the Uno platform and how that works. So basically, when you create an application with the Uno platform, you install an extension that has in Visual Studio for Windows a simple set of templates, and you can create an application using the cross-platform app. And what that gives you is a set of projects that are inside of Visual Studio, and it allows you to run a simple application. When you start that, your shared code is in a project that's called the shared project, and you can run your application using this one. So let's say I start on Windows directly, and that application is going to be built, and I'm going to be running this on Windows. So what happens now is that I can put my application on the side. Oh, sorry about that. I can put my application on the side and then select my Visual Studio. And then what I'm going to be doing is using all the features that are available to me as a developer for that on Windows. So I'm going to be selecting this. And then in my live visual tree, I can go to my code that's there. And I see that there's a missing piece here. So I can say it's not WSL conf with micro WSL conf. So I can change that kind of things. And one of the interesting part there is that I can actually do a bit of more things. So like for instance, I'm going to be creating a slider here, and that slider I'm going to be binding it to. So I can do that slider here, but I'm going to be binding it to the text that's at the top. So let's do that right now. So if I do a binding that way, I do a value here, and I bind that to my slider. What's going to happen is that my number that's at the top here was just data bound to the position of the slider. So it just happens to update my content that way. So that's what's interesting, is that I can just move around and implement that that way. So what that means is that when I can go to WebAssembly, and take that application the same way and launch that application again. So it's going to be building that application and create a website that I can run locally on my machine. That is going to be downloading the SDK, the Mono SDK, and create that application just right away. And what happens is that the browser window opens and provides me with the same application that I've been developing, and goes up to the 95% of the development of that application, and it will just give me the same content. So it's all, you can see all the steps that are running for that application. And what happens here is that I do have the exact same application running inside of the browser using WebAssembly. So this is still C# and XAML. It's running there in my application, and I can still do the same kind of thing. So if I want to have a background that's actually red, I can change that and have my background for my stack panel that becomes red. So that's the kind of things that we're looking at in terms of developing an application using Uno. It's all about making your application on one platform and just not have to bother too much with the others, and then just go over to the other platform and have it run properly on the others. So if you find anything that doesn't work, and you will find some of those because the APIs are so large, just let us know and help us help you if you're developing an application that way. So going back to the applications that we've been developing with this as the company that I work for, which is Inventive, we've been doing applications that way for a very long time, and those applications are consumer grade applications, quite rich, and gives you lots of ideas in terms of what we can do with all this. Yeah, we're quite proud of those applications because they look quite nice. In terms of XAML support, it's kind of a deep stuff, but I'm going to go just quickly over those. But it's all about all the features that you know about when you're using WPF and XAML, and going into rich UI and making complex applications that are desktop grade and make them run either desktop grade, but also on mobile, but on the browser. So that's all the scenarios that are interesting with developing for Uno. We also have localization images support, so you develop your assets once and create your assets once, and they all go over the other platforms quickly, and you don't have to mess around. Localization is something very interesting. We ported over an application to iOS and Android a while back, and that's the Uno calculator. This is actually the Windows calculator that's running inside of the browser, and this one is running on Windows, but it can actually run on any platform, Mac OS, Linux, and others, using WebAssembly. And this is the actual Windows calculator running inside of the browser, and it's also running as a PWA. So if you click on that button here or install it, then you can open the calculator that way using the same feature set. So this is something that is quite interesting, and that application is translated into something like 60 languages, and it's part of the source code that was open sourced by Microsoft. So we just pretty much did nothing. Uno does all this in terms of reusing all the assets that are available for that platform. For that application. So if you want to go take a look, there's the Windows calculator. So it's calculator.platform.uno. So now going back to the slides, we also have the Uno Platform Playground. This is an application that allows you to test on the web what's available as features using the XAML IntelliSense, not XAML IntelliSense, but all the features that are provided there. And that application is quite interesting because it allows you to test all the features that are there, whether it's about changing content that's on that side using that XAML. So you edit the XAML and just happens to go there on the other side when you change the content. I just added WSL conf here. I can also change a few things here, like adding new lines, and data binding just happens to update automatically. So it gives you an idea in terms of what's available, and you can have snippets like testing what a view box would look like inside of Uno, and see how it behaves. It behaves that way. So that's the idea about running there, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about what's about rendering quickly, and the differences, especially with regards to how we're doing this with Linux. On the web, we've got HTML native rendering, and that rendering is all about just creating HTML and rendering it into the browser. It's also about canvas pixel rendering, and that's what we're using for Linux. We're just basically rendering pixel by pixel using Skia. Qt is also doing the same thing using rendering, so it can be the same thing for WebAssembly, but on Linux, that's what we're doing as well. And we're also, so that's HTML rendering for the web, that's using Uno, so basically translating a text block into a paragraph element directly. So that's the kind of things that we're doing there. We also have support for Skia Sharp for WebAssembly, so as a canvas, so you can just add elements directly into that content, and we'll have pixel manipulation, and that is going to be also available as part of the Linux support. So you can do pixel manipulation inside of your application in the same way you would do for another platform. XAML hot reload that I've shown already, it's all about changing those elements directly in that. We also have support for Gitpod, and we're also investigating about support for Gitpod for Linux environments as well, so using Skia and developing there. So it's something that's maybe under our radar, but for Linux users is something that may be of interest. So let's jump over to WSL and see what we can do with that. So we're using WSL quite a bit, and in my application that I have here, and where I put my slider, what I can do is just jump over to the Skia GTK head. So what we're doing is basically making GTK application and make it run on Windows. So let's say start first, make it run on Windows. So that application I can select that project, make it run on Windows. It's going to be building locally, and it's going to be using in here .NET 3.1. So my application is going to be running directly on Windows using GTK. So that's the same application with the big red running. But I can do the same thing with selecting WSL too, and that's quite amazing. And that part is all about making sure that your application is actually running on Linux on your machine without having to jump, and change development environment. So what I'm going to be doing here is just select WSL2. And one thing that's very important when you're doing this is there's a file that's called launch settings.json, and you have to set your display to 0 here, so that it can actually use the next server that's running on your machine, so on the Windows side, so that it actually displays that what's running on the Linux side onto the Windows side. So I'm using VCX server. It's a free open source X11 server, but there are other versions of that can run. So I'm going to be using that display 0 here, and what I'm going to be doing is now just press F5, and my application is going to run as it was. So to show you that it's actually not the it's actually running on WSL, we're going to go to the output window, and in the output window here, you can see that the paths for the loaded files are actually Linux paths. So it's a USR share.net and all that. So it's not using .NET Core on my Windows machine. It's actually using the one that's running inside of WSL. And the other part that's interesting is that the files that have been built by Visual Studio are the ones that are on my Windows file system and not on the Linux file system. And you can see that by the fact that the DLL that I've been loading here is on MNTC users, demos, and source. So this is actually navigating back and forth with the contents that's running on the Windows machine. So let's run the application and see what happens then. So the application is actually running here. So this is an application that's running the X server, and you can see that the application is also having the text and the icon there. So if you change the icon, it's actually moving over to your Linux application. So that's quite nice. And now what I can do is pretty much the same thing as the other. If I want to remove that red there, I can use the other one. And so that is using hot reload using the Linux part of it, and then it runs on. I can change that content running on my Windows machine, so on my Windows context. So that's quite amazing to see. And I can do other things like let's say create a combo box, for instance, or add things like that. So that's the kind of things that you can do, or even add, let's say, a bigger control, for instance. Let's say go for a navigation view. It's a bigger one, but it works. So that's the kind of thing that you can get by running your application that way. And one of my favorite feature here is that, let's say I do find a bug on Uno. Let's rerun the application then and see what happens. I found a bug in Uno, and I want to dive into that and see what happens. So what I'm going to be doing is just pressing F5, and if I press F5 again, Visual Studio is going to tell me, well, you're trying to jump into something for which you don't have the source locally. And because the packages that are coming from Uno are source link enabled, what it will do with this is just download the file that relates to the Uno UI package that has been built using the commit hash, and download the exact source file for the NuGet package that was just downloaded, that was just installed for my application. So I can actually go and debug all that. So if I want to debug the resource dictionary here, I can do it. So that's pretty amazing, and it works when running inside of WSL. So that's pretty amazing to see. So in terms of developer productivity, that's something that's pretty amazing, because you don't need to download and build create specific builds of your libraries when you're trying to develop those. So that's the kind of things that are needed to do there. So just to make sure that you know how to set up that one. When you go to the options for Visual Studio, you can go in general and make sure that the enable source link support checkbox is enabled. and that the enable just my code is unchecked. So that way you can actually drill into code that is not locally on your machine for which you don't have the local symbols. So that's one important part. So that's one way we're using WSL. But the other part where we're using WSL is all about the WebAssembly, and that one is actually quite interesting. So that one is a small application that is running for WebAssembly, and what it does basically is a small application that one is a preview of Visual Studio. I'm going to have to change that one. So let's open that file using this. So this is an application that basically just has a text block and a button. And when I click on that button, I want to invoke some code that is inside some C++ library that I have developed. And if I have any kind of library that is custom or known or something like that, then that's one way to do it. So what we can do to do that is I have a script that will just build my my module here that's in C++ and create a bitcode file that I can fit into my WebAssembly application, and that will be statically linked into the application so that it can run as a single package on the web. So to do that, I can just open an Ubuntu shell here and basically use navigate to that path using WSL path. So I can take the path to this and then do cd WSL path with the backtick, and then I will go into that native folder. And then what I can do is just, because it's the same file system, use the build here. So I'm going to be building my my library. That's it. It was quick because it's a very small file. And so my module is basically a custom add that takes 2 integers and returns the addition of those 2 integers plus 1. And then when I go to my Windows application, so my C# application, sorry, what I can do then is, because my module is called mymodule.bc, I can take that module here and then declare that as an external function, and then call it when I click the button. So what I'm doing here is basically just adding those 2 numbers and then running the application. So the first use of Ubuntu on WSL is about just compiling some WebAssembly modules. So I take that module and just build it to run to create a bitcode compatible WebAssembly module. And then the second use of that is about using mscripten to generate all that and make it a Windows application by linking the my module bitcode file that I have here in my application and adding it to the main WebAssembly module. So to show you that, I'm going to be building that, and what we can do what we can see here in while the application is building is that so the C# is compiling here. And then afterwards, what's going to happen is I'm downloading a few things. So this is about downloading the Modo SDK, then downloading all the things that relate to generation of WebAssembly code from .NET. And then here I'm jumping into Bash and running bash.exe. It actually goes quite fast. I'm running bash.exe here. There it is. It's a bit up. So I'm running bash here and there. So I'm running that kind of thing. So bash.exe.c, and that part is automatically generated by the Uno platform. But that's to show you that we're actually doing things like running all that under Linux. So it's doing all these things and mappings, all the mappings and buildings and linking all that content. And when we're done, the application is actually running inside of the browser. And when I go and click on my button, I can see 42. And it's 20 plus 21 plus 1, which is actually code that's been running. So I've been doing C# to native code, so to C++ code and back, and showing that value inside of my application. So that's a very small application, but that shows you that it's all about getting things running in different environments, and about reusing all your about reusing all your code that is existing. And that same thing and scenarios can run the same way using Linux, native Linux binaries. So if you build that using GCC or G++, and then you can link that and reuse that as dynamic libraries on your Linux application, and it will just run pretty much the same. So that's about it. I won't go further into more details because it's something that you can just dive into if you want to go and see what happens. You can how you can do it by yourself. You can go to platform.uno, and there's all kinds of documentation about developing applications that way. And the last one is about thank you for for hosting, for inviting me to WSN Conf.
Thanks for coming. That was a great presentation. I'm really excited about what Uno allows developers with existing C# and XAML experience to really broaden that.
Exactly.
And there may even be users who have never tried C# and XAML, but want to then.
They may want, exactly.
For them, but some people just outside of the .NET and like NuGet package. I mean, they're just not aware of all this code that's out there that they can use and leverage.
Exactly.
And it's just sitting there to take and build great apps with. So
exactly. And we have surprises to come with regard to Ubuntu and snapping applications and things like that. So that's something that people should be in the lookout for, and with Uno News and WSL News.
Certainly. Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you.